You know that kind of person who seems to live in a world where the rules don't apply to them? Who walks around the building like they own it, looks down on others, and acts as if everyone else is beneath them. That was the guy from 403. A neighbor who, from day one, made it clear, living with him wouldn't be easy. His name was Leandro. He worked in sales, always wore a suit, talked loudly on his cell phone in the hallways, parked wherever he pleased, and made a point of showing he had no patience for anyone. When I arrived at the building, he didn't even bother to greet me. And I've always been polite to everyone, even to a fault. But him, he'd walk right past. At most, a cold nod, and only if someone looked first. My first impression was of someone arrogant. But I tried not to judge. After all, everyone has their own problems, and maybe that was just his way. But it wasn't. Time proved that Leandro was exactly what he seemed, arrogant, mocking, and completely unaware of community life. It started with small things. For example, he would take up 2 parking spaces in the garage as if it were normal, his own and the guests'. And if anyone complained, he would say, "Take another one. The building has plenty of space." There was one time when I myself had to park in the guests' parking space to unload some heavy boxes. I stayed there for 5 minutes. When I returned, he was already waiting for me, arms crossed and a frown on his face. He said loudly, in front of the other residents, "Nice, huh? Everyone does what they want now." I was surprised. I explained that it was a quick situation and apologized, but he made a point of laughing and turning away with that air of superiority. From then on, I began to notice that he loved to provoke. At condominium meetings, he made a point of interrupting others, criticizing any suggestion, and trying to ridicule anyone who disagreed with him. Always with that, "I know better than you" attitude. And when anyone dared to raise their voice against him, he'd spout phrases like, "Sorry, are you a building manager or just looking for show?" He was the kind of neighbor who made everyone roll their eyes. But no one wanted a confrontation. Many people preferred to swallow hard rather than confront him. Especially because, when he felt confronted, he would escalate his tone, make a scene, and even find a way to come off as the victim. Our relationship, though distant, grew increasingly strained. Not that we argued directly. I avoided it. But I knew he was watching me. I knew he didn't like me. The reason? It was never clear. Maybe because I always remained calm, because I didn't lower my head, or simply because he needed someone to feel better about attacking. One of the most uncomfortable times was late afternoon, in the elevator. I got in with a neighbor from 501, and Leandro was already there. We were discussing a suggestion to install more cameras in the garage, and he blurted out of the blue, "Why? Anyone who wants to snoop around in other people's cars should go to work first." Total silence. The elevator stopped, he stepped out, and the door closed. The other neighbor looked at me and said, "Dude, he told you that, right?" I just shook my head. Because, even without naming names, everyone knew, the target was always chosen. The most ironic thing. It was Leandro, precisely, who seemed to do whatever he wanted with other people's cars. A neighbor once commented that she found her rear-view mirror hanging off after a night of arguing in the garage. But no one had the courage to accuse him directly. There was a lack of evidence. And the fear of retaliation was louder. It was in this climate that I continued my life in the building, trying to keep the peace, even with a neighbor who thought he was above the rules, politeness, and coexistence. But I had no idea that, soon, he would cross a line from which there would be no going back. He was going to mess with my car. And not only that, he was going to laugh in my face. But he also didn't know that, at the next condominium meeting, he'd be crying in front of everyone. His arrogance was about to collide with the truth. And the entire building would watch. When I saw my car destroyed, it felt like something inside me had shattered along with the bumper. That mocking laugh from my neighbor at 403 still echoed in my ears. He walked past me slowly, hands in his pockets and a smile that showed he felt above the law, above morality, above all human coexistence. This wasn't just material damage. It was an insult. A slap in the face to someone who had always respected the rules. And for the first time in years, I felt overcome by an impulse I didn't recognize in myself: rage. I took a deep breath. I wanted to go up to him and scream. But I didn't. Do you know why? Because when someone wants to see you lose control, the worst punishment you can give them is to remain calm. I called the building manager. I told him exactly what happened. But, as expected, he simply replied, "Do you have any proof?" And then, I understood the game. I would need more than indignation to unmask this guy. I would need a strategy. I began to chat discreetly with the other residents. I asked if they had ever had problems with a neighbor from 403. The response was almost unanimous. Everyone had a story. Parking invasions, untimely noise, insults in the elevator, trash thrown out after hours. One of the oldest neighbors, Mr. Alfredo, even said, "This guy thinks he owns the building. No one here has the courage to confront him, but everyone wants to." And it was at that moment that the idea began to grow within me. I wasn't alone. And maybe, just maybe, it was time to turn the tables. That same week, I filed a formal request for an extraordinary condominium meeting with a specific agenda: coexistence behavior and vandalism. I used all the rules set forth in the bylaws to support the request. And since the building had already accumulated several silent complaints against 403, it didn't take long for the meeting to be scheduled. But I knew that still wasn't enough. So, I discreetly installed a camera in my car, with legal authorization, and prepared everything for a possible relapse from our exemplary neighbor. And like a script written by fate, it came. 3 days before the meeting, he hit my rearview mirror again, this time on purpose, thinking no one would see. But he did. And the camera captured everything. The moment of impact, the laughter, the offensive gesture, the disdain. When I watched it, I confess I felt a lump in my throat. I couldn't believe someone could be so cruel so easily. But now I had what I needed. Evidence. Witnesses. Rules. And a group of neighbors beginning to rise up around me. The day of the meeting arrived. And even though my heart was racing, I entered that room with serenity. It was the first time in years that I felt that justice could, indeed, be served collectively, organized, peacefully, and devastatingly. On the day of the meeting, I arrived early. My heart was pounding, but I was determined. I didn't want a fight. I wanted justice. When the building manager began the proceedings, everything seemed normal. Regular topics, complaints about the elevator, the stuck gate, the noise from Unit 202. And then it was time for general business. I asked to speak. I got straight to the point. I'd like to report a serious incident involving my car and the resident of 403. The room fell into an uncomfortable silence. Some residents glanced at each other. I took a deep breath and continued. I showed the photos of the broken rearview mirror. Then, the video I'd captured from the kitchen window. 403 kicking my car. I then described his approach in the parking lot and his sarcastic laugh. Finally, I mentioned the stories of other neighbors who, like me, had been victims of his hostility but were afraid to speak out. An elderly resident raised her hand and confirmed, "He kicked my trash can the other day just because I left it outside early." Another, younger resident, commented that he'd had a mysterious flat tire on his bike before and suspected the same neighbor. Suddenly, the meeting turned into an informal tribunal. 403 tried to laugh, but this time the audience wasn't on his side. "This is a setup. This video proves nothing. You have no right to accuse me," he shouted, visibly nervous. The building manager intervened. "Let's maintain order. You'll have your chance to speak." But instead of defending himself with solid arguments, 403 only attacked. He said everyone in the building was jealous, that they were conspiring against him, that I was a spoiled brat who couldn't take a joke. His words echoed like bullets in his own foot. It was then that the building manager, already impatient, revealed something no one expected. "This isn't the first formal complaint against you, Mr. 403. We have at least 5 previous records of aggressive behavior. This meeting is being recorded, and the assembly has the authority to deliberate on action." The neighbor turned white. The arrogance drained from his face. He tried to get up to leave, but the building manager asked him to stay until the end. He was cornered. For the first time, he felt the weight of responsibility. One resident calmly suggested a vote on temporarily barring 403 from using the building's common areas, as a warning: the pool, gym, and party room. Another asked the condominium to hire legal counsel to determine what other sanctions could be applied. The majority approved. The vote was nearly unanimous. The neighbor from 403, previously confident and mocking, broke down. With tears in his eyes, he muttered that it was all unfair, that he had his reasons, that he was going through a difficult time, but no one interrupted him. Everyone listened. And in the end, he left the meeting with his head down, mumbling incoherent words, as if he had finally understood that he no longer owned the building. After that meeting, the mood in the building changed drastically. The neighbor from 403, who had previously reigned with arrogance and contempt, became the subject of whispered comments in the hallways and suspicious looks at every elevator encounter. It was as if his mask had slipped before everyone, and he didn't know how to compose himself. In the days that followed, he tried to act as if nothing had happened, but the atmosphere was too tense for that. Several residents began to avoid direct contact, and even the most peaceful no longer had the patience for the provocations he had previously so easily imposed. I, on the other hand, felt relieved and empowered. This wasn't just about me or my car, it was about respect and justice within our community. One of the most striking consequences was the condominium's official request for Leandro, the neighbor from 403, to repair my car, as well as compensation for the damage caused. He tried to stall, but with the support of most residents and the meeting minutes, there was no escape. Justice, this time, was collective and clear. Furthermore, he was temporarily banned from using the building's common areas, which was a harsh blow for him, as he loved to show off in these spaces. The pool, the gym, the party room. This had a ripple effect. Over time, he realized that his aggressive and arrogant behavior didn't give him any advantages, only isolation. At one of the last meetings, he appeared with a visibly dejected expression and, to everyone's surprise, publicly apologized. He said he had acted wrongly, that he had allowed arrogance to dominate his actions, and that he was willing to change to improve coexistence with the other residents. Many were surprised, others thought it was just an attempt to regain lost prestige, but the fact is that his action ushered in a new phase. I confess that, even in the face of the apology, I maintained my firm stance. Acknowledging mistakes is important, but actions speak louder than words. The entire building began to monitor for any setbacks. And the change in the atmosphere was visible. Coexistence improved, peace returned to the hallways, and meetings once again became spaces for dialogue and respect, not confrontation. Looking back and remembering this story teaches me one thing. Sometimes, the best way to face arrogance and disrespect is not by bowing your head, but by acting with courage and patience. It wasn't easy. I had to gather evidence, seek allies, and stand firm in the face of provocation. But justice, when served with intelligence and unity, always prevails. And for those going through similar situations, my advice is, don't let the arrogance of others destroy your balance. Seek help, organize yourself, talk to your neighbors, gather evidence if necessary. True strength lies in unity and the ability to act with serenity, even when everything seems to be conspiring against you. In the end, the neighbor at 403 learned his lesson the hard way, and the building, and we residents, gained a more just and harmonious environment. It was a silent victory, without shouting or aggression, but it showed that no one is above the rules and mutual respect.